in my interest in being a part of politics again, I was working with the Libertarian Party of Wake County under contract, so I can't say a whole lot about it, to help them figure out which candidates running for local office this year. They wanted to have nice things to say, physical flyers to hand out to people, as to help them holding their nose of voting this year. Libertarians like us, we often feel a sort of unhappiness about having to choose between them, a difficulty in picking or deciding whether or not to just go home and pick no one. So it ended up being that my focus, by happenstance, was the race between Bella Huang and Renee Miller. Huang being the Democrat, Miller being the Republican. And when I was first learning about Bella Huang, she was giving off red flags immediately. The first thing I learned about her was a conversation between her and one of us who spoke with her to say, hey, we would like for you to take a quiz so that we can learn more about your political positions, your thinking process beyond just like the stuff you say on your website. She responded with basically saying, I already took that quiz. Didn't I get that back to you? To which the Libertarian said, no, you didn't. And so she said, okay, well, I will take that quiz soon and you'll get it eventually. It never ended up happening. And so that was red flag number 2. And then I contacted her to follow up with her about that specifically, but basically I had called her up. To be fair, it was late at night with the intention of, I was going to say very early on in the phone call that I'm happy to call her back in the morning if it would be preferable. I was more than anything else, I was a voter in her area and a political activist, and I wanted to speak to her about something. But before I could really get deep into speaking with her, immediately she had hung up on me. And so that was the 3rd red flag. Now, the 4th red flag was the fact that in that very brief moment of time that I was speaking with her, I instantly got this pessimistic gut feeling that she was not a good English speaker. And so that's not good if you want to rule over maybe hundreds of thousands of people. And so that's 4 red flags already. And at this point, I did not know anything about her besides these things I mentioned and a little that I've seen from her website. And from her website, one thing I did like is that she not only does she want to build more sidewalks in Cary, which I think is just universal good. I think we earnestly need more sidewalks. That would be good for a person's right to travel around. There is a libertarian angle to very basic infrastructure, let's say. Because after all, if cars can get around, why shouldn't people on foot? A little more controversial than that, I personally quite like that she was into a sort of very vague environmentalism. I got the impression that her zeal was less than that of Miss Johnson. She's not really gunning for a very specific thing that she wants to do in Cary. In the way that I'm hopeful that it's mild by nature, that really appeals to the kind of environmentalism that I seek out. That's the only nice things I can really say about what I knew at the time. I also saw on her website that she wants a pipeline from public high schools to her civil service. And to be fair, one way to look at that is I would actually qualify very much of the kind of thing that she wants to see. To foreshadow something that might actually have something to do with the fact that she seemed to admire me when I went to meet her, but I'm getting ahead of myself. In other words, she wants people to graduate high school and pretty much instantly just like have like internships and what have you, and like really get involved with civil service. And so I think her intentions are kind of innocent, but I think they are nevertheless like very left-leaning, maybe unintentionally, to be fair. So I'm a little bit uncomfortable at the thought of consequences of such a policy as that, especially in the way that like it's a little odd that she focuses on this with her having very few total policies that she genuinely cares about, that this would be the thing. And her deep connections with public schooling in all kinds of ways, that kind of establishment has me worried with regards to this policy, which would otherwise be even more innocent than I think it truly is. Next, she also has in her website, and then later I found out, like, continues to talk about the importance of doing something about the housing crisis as it relates to Cary. Now, I was very vague just now with how I worded that, and she herself is very vague about this exact topic, which, in the way that she comes from a Democrat background, I have to conclude that the influences in our life which would kind of transform the vagueness into policy when she gets elected if she doesn't yet have any real idea of exactly what to do yet, then insofar as, even in that case, if she's kind of an innocent person with kind of like an apolitical kind of centrist, kind of like no idea what she wants, even then, she's surrounded by Democrats, and she comes from the Democrat Party, so I have to conclude that she probably wants to go about this problem through things like subsidizing and leaving in place regulations and not changing the zoning code very much. There are some exceptions in the Democrat circles. I mean, for as much as I dislike Allison Dahl, I will admit that she actually will sometimes approach this issue pragmatically and say, we have to get rid of the regulations. We should reconsider zoning. So it's possible that there could be good influences in our circle. But I feel that for the most part, Democrats have a very bad track record with understanding and doing something about the housing crisis and causing the housing crisis in the first place. So her vagueness can be a good thing to some degree, but it also demonstrates to me that more than likely she probably doesn't know how to go about this the right way. And so I very much don't trust her with the housing crisis. She might as well, at best, she's probably going to have a neutral net zero effect on the issue in the end and fail to do something about it. Last but not least is the fact that she, on her website, makes it clear that she cares very much about DEI, especially with regards to the Asian community, but I get the impression probably as a whole, Democrat circles like to heavily criticize, to use a different example, the LGBT without the T community. Democrats hate people like that because it's like, you gotta include the T with everything else. And so in a similar sort of way, I can only imagine that they would not be friendly or supportive if she turned out to be somebody who's like, oh, I only really care about the Asians and no one else. I don't think that flies in her circles. In the way that she's campaigning on this issue, we can draw an inference that with environmentalism, she didn't just say, oh, the city of Cary is great on environmentalism, we should keep it that way. She said we should strengthen the programs. So in that similar way, I can only reasonably say that she probably feels the same way about DEI. She doesn't just think that the DEI that we have, which is very intense for a town in North Carolina compared to the average, and it's really intense as is. No, she probably wants to strengthen it further. And so this is why it's last but certainly not least, because if you actually look at the out-of-control DEI stuff that we have, specifically if you'll focus on the subtopic of cultural programs that the city pushes, Indian religious festivals, LGBT movie nights, stuff like that, maybe, I don't know, maybe like Project 1619, kind of like film festival things, forced on the taxpayers, certainly, that they have to pay for these things to be in this city-owned theater. In other words, that these programs not only push a very left-wing, sometimes even slightly anti-American kind of viewpoint, and would be funded even further, more so than ever before, if she was to be elected. So this is very much an example of like a prime issue in our city that she not only doesn't recognize the problem, she wants to make it worse. And so from a libertarian point of view, this is a very awful thing because libertarians would rather the city sell the movie theater, which is pushing this propaganda on people, rather than to deepen its funding. And I'm very much not okay with that. From having learned initially about Bella Huang, I was disappointed in the way that I had learned about her first, and this was very much a reinforcement of the idea of so few politicians from Democrat or Republican Party. I would even lump in the Green Party in with that personally. Inspire optimism or trust. Oftentimes they seem to just kind of take for granted that they're just part of the big party and that they have a 50% chance of winning, so I even really try all that hard. And likely will do more damage than good, whether they realize it or not. That's often our libertarian perspective, but it is a little bit depressing about once a year or once every 2 years to be reminded of this firsthand when you learn more about candidates. And so imagine my surprise when there comes a strong contrast with the other candidate, Miss Miller. In likewise fashion, I learned from the other libertarian I work with on this issue that Miss Miller was keen to take the quiz and to be very transparent about her fuller views. Not afraid to share it with us, even though it wasn't a perfect answer. Left a little bit to be desired. Let me be clear that she is not a squeaky clean libertarian or anything like that. We're talking about a Republican, so don't forget that. And so anyway, She allowed us to learn more about her, that she was very keen to work with us and to be transparent and helpful, um, and friendly. She was quick to respond, professional. She was very much off to a good start with us. I had at the time, from that first initial information about her, then looked at her website and saw that she has only 3 issues. And they're, in contrast to my Republican opponent, Mr. Hensley, as you might recall, he also had 3 issues. But the difference was that he was extremely vague about them and extremely centrist with his things. These are 3 issues that libertarians can rather get behind. And they were detailed enough that I felt like she wasn't just saying whatever it took to get elected, that she actually knew what she was talking about. The 3 issues were that she wanted sensible conservation. So this is, in other words, like a more milder form of environmentalism, more likely to be like Theodore Roosevelt, less likely to be like Joe Biden, to help you understand what I'm talking about. More likely to be like Bush Sr., the president of the late 80s. Like I'm like a 1980s conservationist rather than a modern day Biden kind of extreme environmentalist, so that people don't misunderstand me. So is she. And so if you care about nature, whatever, then that's a good thing. Okay, so maybe you don't. Maybe that's controversial among our circles. Next, she is very much about low spending, low taxes, and in that way a focus on very few things except for policing. Enforcing violations of the NAP is another way to look at it. She wouldn't see it in those terms, but that's basically what she's advocating for. She basically wants a transparent police force and little else for the government to be spending money on, frankly. That, if somebody steals from you, if there's crime, if there's killings, the police should be doing something about that. Makes sense to me. So she sounds honestly kind of libertarian, whether or not she realizes it. She's running with the Republicans, as a reminder. And so anyway, she has a kind of a tepid, pro-growth attitude. She cares about the city growing, wanting it to grow, permitting it to grow, which is to say the government getting out of the way of it growing, but then balancing that with having a sincere care about community, like and an understanding of what is community really, because community isn't just a hodgepodge melting pot of literally anything. That's not real community. Real community is having a respect for the kind of natural, slow changing or preservation that happens when people are kind of left alone to care about the things that they naturally care about, their traditions, their values, a lack of extreme disruption of the demographics in a city. Could be said to be a community's culture and strength. And a libertarian might argue, and reasonably so, that perhaps growth is more important in the way that it represents freedom than kind of agonizing over preserving a community. And I can respect that point of view, and maybe this is another reason you might disagree with Ms. Miller. But maybe I'm a little bit on the outside and believing that actually traditions matter. The values that a community grew strong with, maybe their religious disposition, all those things, that they actually make a real difference. If you treat that like it doesn't matter and then you displace that, then you will find that what led to a city succeeding can very easily be replaced with something worse. No offense to immigrants and what have you. And with that in mind, I can see why she would agonize so hard about that being equally important. But I also respect and also want to deeply point out that unlike some of her Republican peers, she makes a point of saying that growth is important and that she's not going to stay out of the way of growth, but actually is going to try to find some kind of synthesis with the community, find some kind of YIMBY, yes in my backyard kind of way that they can accept growth. So those are very good things. You don't always hear that in a Republican or a Democrat. We should take our victories when they come, because beggars can't be choosers. We interviewed her, and in the initial round of questioning, in my humble opinion, we threw her softballs. Yes, she likes low taxes and low spending. Yes, she likes policing crime. Yeah, yes, she is aware of the nitty-gritty needs of things, like how's our sewer system? How's our roads? Those kinds of things. Yes, we asked about those things, and yes, she gave right answers to them. But, there were 0 red flags that came out of that meeting. In fact, the contrary, both on our website and also in this interview, a common theme I kept noticing. She says that she's been in Cary for 20 years, or at least that she's been active in Cary for 20 years, maybe lived here for longer. That's a long time, and it really shows in the way that she speaks. She knows what she's talking about. She sounds like somebody who has loved this community for 2 decades straight. She sounds like the kind of person you would want to vote for, the kind of person who was made for this job. Notice the contrast between what I just said and what I've talked about with the other 3 candidates. And so with that in mind, she seems like a natural. She seems like she's a very thoughtful person that has really thought about the various kind of issues, that knows what she's talking about, is an expert. She has been involved for longer than 3 years, but has been deeply involved with the Cary community for 3 years straight. She's not just an intellectual, not just somebody who's lived here a long time, but is somebody who really cares and has the wisdom that comes from that. On her website, she says that common sense is very important for Cary. And I think her choice of words is born from the fact that she has cared about this place for so long and approaches it with so much intellectual care. Okay, so I'm going to pause for a moment to acknowledge, yeah, it's getting a little bit dark behind me. This is actually my second day recording this video so far, and it's now approaching 7 p.m., so the sun is going down. I'm probably going to turn a light on. This is actually a different shirt. I hope you can put up with that. I know, I'm sorry, so digression over. Anyway, I wanted to exemplify what I mean when I say that she was a part of the community deeply for 20 years. But I want to give you an example just so you understand what a difference that makes. So when you care long enough, you have an inborn sense of dignity for other people. Likewise, you come to know a lot of it from it. You become smarter through it. And so during the interviewing process, she made an offhanded comment, a nuanced answer to one of her questions. She said that she was aware of the broken window fallacy. She assumes, she didn't actually explain it, she assumed that my peer and I knew exactly what that meant. Me being an idiot, I didn't know what that meant. I actually had to look it up afterwards. But that shows she had dignity from me. That she's of course Matthew knows what that means. It's this idea that if a building has a broken window in it, what tends to happen, that kind of signals to the wrong people that you can commit crimes on this building, like graffiti, and get away with it because this is a building that's not cared for. The implication being that Miss Miller probably thinks that we need to be very vigilant about broken windows. She also mentioned in that conversation at one point, not that it matters, because I want to be clear that city officials have no control over the Second Amendment policy, right? But it doesn't hurt that she mentioned that she cares very deeply about the Second Amendment, that she is very much a believer. Policing's great and all, but the ultimate defense is if you have a gun that you use for self-defense purposes. Even if you never fire the gun, just branding it at people is a good way of keeping the peace. By extension, we can ascertain she's probably really good on property rights, if that's how she feels. If she thinks that we should, in her own words, she said that we should train teenagers how to use guns for their own safety, and to be responsible people with those guns. Well, I also asked her some questions afterwards because I was like, man, even with all this that she told me, libertarians have been tricked by Republicans before. I don't want to do what I'm doing in this video prematurely. I was so worried about kind of being like those kind of people that get like a "you fell for it" award. I don't want to be that libertarian, right? And so I was like, I want to keep asking her questions, but I was really worried. I thought to myself, she really doesn't owe me anything. Here I am as a person who really put Mr. Hensley through the ringer only just 1 year before. A man who was in her political party. I can understand if she would resent me for that, for being so incredibly harsh on a fellow Republican. From that point of view, why help out a guy from a different political party who has a history of having fights with people in my political party? Why even bother, right? I'm so busy as a candidate. Why answer his questions? I was thinking about this myself. I was like, I can't even think of a good reason why she should answer my question. Strategically speaking, maybe she should just ignore me and knock on doors or something. But you know something? Renee Miller was nice enough to answer my questions anyway. I asked her 3 questions. They were pushed her on radical transparency, And I made a very kind of we the people kind of constitutionalist kind of argument on that. And I asked her if she would be willing to consider selling assets owned by the city for kind of propaganda purposes and to kind of quit with the cultural pushing that the city does. Again, to kind of asking her to take an opposite stance of that, than one of the main stances that her opponent has. She gave great answers to those things. She gave very libertarian sounding answers to these, though not very radical. So overall, at this point in time, I was rather happy with her. This is the type of candidate that we libertarians look for, to be able to say, for a change, we're not going to just stay home.